Okay, today we're going to finally get around to a shoe review which I've been promising for a while, which is the Dino PB Pro. This is their premier racing shoe, their Hyperlight Racer, 163 grams in my men's size 10, EU 44. Is insanely light, same weight as an Adidas Adios Pro Evo 1, and it's coming in for a fraction of the price, which we'll get to. I'm very, very excited by this shoe. I think that this has got to be one of the best shoes that I've worn this year, and I'm excited to share my full thoughts. As always, we'll go from top to bottom. We'll chat about the price point, and I've got 4 shoes here to compare it to, which I think is important with some of these Asian brands, kind of letting you know exactly where they slot into the market. Starting off with some specs. As always, it's a little bit tricky to find accurate information on these shoes and oftentimes needs translating or interpreting. Some brands will measure the stack height with or without the insole in it. Sometimes they use different sample sizes. A little bit tricky to find accurate information. I would say, based on kind of eyeballing it, using a ruler to measure it, taking into account a bit of sidewalls, we're probably looking in under 40 mil of foam, probably closer to 36, I would say, based on what I've found here. Again, a little bit tricky with a beveling of the heel here. In the thickest part here, I'd say we're definitely getting close to 36, if not a little bit more. In terms of the drop, again, a little bit tricky to work it out. It does almost look like a zero drop situation with the sculpting of the midsole. Probably a little bit of midsole sidewalls up in the forefoot here. I would say the ride of it feels closer to a 4 or 5 mil drop. You get that kind of gutsy feeling up front, and standing around you do feel like you're kind of sitting back in the shoe a little bit more. So this is not an 8 or 10 mil drop shoe, definitely closer to 4 or 5, and the way that it runs conveys that pretty easily. In terms of the foam compound, this is what I suspect to be an uncompressed TPEE foam, which is going to be a very similar compound to what you find in the Adidas Adios Pro Evo 1, which I have handled and tried on, and the foam has a very similar texture to that, almost a kind of furry, fuzzy feel to it, where it hasn't been compressed down with heat and pressure into the mold. It's just been cut from a big block of foam, and you can see that with the kind of fraying on the edges and the kind of rough cuts here as well, with the glue line running through it. So this is an extremely light foam, but it still holds its structure really well. Definitely still has that kind of density that you expect from foams like Light Strike Pro, probably closer to the older version, but just obviously lighter. And I would say a bit more energetic as well. It's not a super squishy foam, but definitely on the more, immediately resilient, poppy, bouncy. I really, really like the foam that they've got going on here. This does have a full length carbon plate, which runs from quite far down in the heel, scooping a little bit lower through the midfoot and then kind of scooping up following the geometry of the foam. A little bit interesting to see such a low bottom loaded plate in a super shoe. Oftentimes these days with new models like the Edge, you'll see it sitting quite high, scooping down into the forefoot and then returning back up to give you that kind of shovel scoop up front, really tip you off the front of the shoe, I guess. Here though, we do have quite a low flat plate relatively, which does make you wonder whether plate position is actually influencing foam compression and dynamics as much as people say. I'm not certain that it does. I think especially if you have a more resilient foam like this, the carbon plate isn't really doing a whole lot until you get up into the midfoot and actually engage that rocker, where you might otherwise flex it and lose that shape. So interesting there. They've gone for a low plate position. I don't think it is to the detriment of the shoe. Interesting to see how that kind of progresses in the future, especially with shoes like the Fast R3 being fairly efficient in some tests, whether that's to do with the foam or the plate position. It's a pretty interesting discussion either way. Weight-wise, as I said before, coming in at 163 grams in a US 10, EU 44. Very impressive, exactly the same weight as the Evo Pro 1 in my size. It's coming in a little bit lighter than the new Tokyo series, and I'm pretty sure about the same weight, maybe a little bit lighter than the Fast R3. So it's still ahead of that next wave of Western super shoes. It's up to date with the Hypershoes, but if I'm being really honest, in that range of 160 to 180 grams, I don't think you're going to notice a difference. I think the components and how they play together are going to be more of an influence on the running experience than 10 or 20 grams. I don't really think people can notice 25 gram difference in a shoe oftentimes, especially when compounding that with the plates and the foams and everything else like that. I don't think that this is going to make a huge difference compared to those weight-wise. But I do think the foams kind of compensate for that in themselves. Starting off with the upper of this shoe, this has got to be one of the most breathable, transparent upper materials that I have tried. It's like a nylon thread weave here, almost like a fishing net, and it is fantastic. Very flexible, but it doesn't stretch at all, so the lockdown is quite secure. The lacing setup that they have here, the eyelet chain, is in the perfect position to really crank down that midfoot and get a secure hold. The heel counter is reasonably flexible, but when you're locking your ankle down into it, it does kind of give you a little bit more resistance than I was expecting from a shoe of this weight. In terms of the fit, it does fit quite long, but I would say with the width of it, true to size is probably still the way to go. So I've gone for a size 10 EU 44, and I have probably a full thumbnail, if not a touch more, ahead of my toes. But with the way that it fit through the midfoot and the way that it rode as well, as in running experience, I probably wouldn't go a half size down even if I had my time again. So that's something to consider. If you float between half sizes, the half size down, you'll probably get away with it as long as you don't have wide feet. But I do think that the midfoot lockdown and the heel counter lockdown does compensate for that extra length. And I honestly don't think extra length is something you should be worried about. Better to have extra room up in front rather than too little and completely ruin the running experience. Really like the upper here. It's simple, it's effective. I love the serrated laces, need to be standard on all racing shoes. Pretty much all that I need from a racing shoe of this weight. Moving down to the midsole and the ride experience, uncompressed foam, bottom loaded plate, fairly simple geometry. You wouldn't have guessed that it's so easy to make a super shoe, which is just fantastic. This has got to be one of the best rides that I've tried this year. It's dense, it's responsive, it feels efficient immediately. It doesn't really feel that special standing around in it or even jogging through a warm-up. But once you step on the gas, compress it, get up into the kind of midfoot, forefoot section, the response is fantastic. The rock ring is awesome. So easy to lock into a rhythm. Really is beautiful. You do get that kind of weightless sensation, which I've described with some other hyperlight racing shoes, where it kind of feels like it's just you and the road again. It's this kind of nice pure feeling to it compared to something like an Alpha Fly, which is just constantly reminding you that it's there on your foot. Even if that is a good thing, you know, you're focusing on hitting the AirPod to get the pop. It's just loud and clompy, and it is dictating the way that you run. Whereas something like this feels like it's just getting out of the way and letting you put down the paces that you want. I've had a great time in this. I think the paces that suit it the best are definitely that kind of 10K, half marathon, that kind of zone there. But with the enjoyment that I've had at those paces in training, I wouldn't be scared to take this to the marathon for me, which would be hopefully going sub 240. So still moving reasonably well. I'm still getting a decent amount of compression, but I would say that this is probably not going to be the shoe that I would recommend for people who are trying to get through a marathon comfortably. It's just probably not going to offer a whole lot unless you're compressing the foam. Maybe you're a heavier bloke or lady, I guess, if you're one of the 1% who watches this YouTube channel. Unless you're putting in a decent amount of compression or turning your feet over reasonably well, it's not going to offer as much as some other shoes like an Adios Pro 4 or an Endorphin Elite, which are a little bit more, I guess, comfort focused, a little bit more democratic, if that makes sense. I've had some people say that this shoe is not stable, and yeah, it probably isn't if you're landing far back in the heel or if you're landing with slightly sloppy mechanics. There isn't any rounding to it, there's no flaring whatsoever. You're either on the platform or you're off it, but if you're running with clean mechanics in a distance which is appropriate, 5 or 10K, half marathon if you can keep things under control, I don't think it's terrible. Like, it's not like it's compressing all over the place. The foam is still resilient. Land on the foam, land cleanly, and I do think it rewards you. This is not that comforting, stable Cielo X1, which is going to guide you through your stride and keep you comfortable. This is a shoe for people who do want to chase the pace and push along, which I'm not saying that you can't use this if you're sitting at, 3, 4, 5-hour marathons and you want to have a crack at a 5K PB, 10K PB, I'm just saying that there is going to be shoes which are more comfortable if you have stability issues. Self-selection here is key. Don't go expecting this elite level racing shoe to be your comforting friend at the end of a race. Really, really love the ride of this shoe. Definitely got to be one of the best that I've tried this year. Every session that I've had in it has just been an absolute joy. It's one of those ones where you just don't seem to be able to ruin a session no matter how hard you try. End of a couple of reps, legs are feeling heavy. You can just keep on turning the legs over. Even if it's not exactly what you want, it just stops you from falling apart completely with that reliable bounce, that smooth geometry. And when I'm really thinking about it, I'm not entirely sure why it works so well. It's such a simple setup. Nice foam, lightweight, simple rocker, bottom loaded plate. I don't really know where the magic of this shoe is, but it just works. So yeah, really, really like this one. This is going to be in the top 2 or 3 racing shoes that I've used this year, up against some pretty nice competition as well. And it will definitely be in the conversation whenever I'm considering a 10, half, and it'll probably be in and around the conversation for the full marathon as well, depending on how I use it going forward. Down to the outsole, we actually have a fairly substantial patch of rubber on the forefoot for a racing shoe of this weight. You could have probably saved, honestly, another 10 grams if they trimmed it down more, but I'm pretty happy to have something which actually grips and is going to last longer than a couple of runs if this is the trade-off that we're making. Big patch up in the forefoot, small patch on the lateral edge, which I think is good. Nothing on the inside edge, which could be risky for some, but for myself, mainly striking in the midfoot and forefoot, grip was fantastic. I'm not seeing anywhere so far. This is really heavy duty stuff. So yeah, I think this is all you can ask for from a racing shoe of this weight. Durability, I've got no promises here. I personally think that TPE foam is one of the most durable on the market. Is it going to be the same when it's uncompressed? Who really knows? I've done 40Ks of running on this now, and I just think it's got better and better, if not stayed exactly the same. I don't know whether my opinions are just continuing to rise. I don't think this is going to fall apart as quickly as people claim that the Evo Pro 1 was going to. That had the one marathon race headline, which just got thrown around the place willy-nilly. But then I've seen a lot of people wearing that shoe for 300Ks pretty happily, with it still giving them a decent amount of performance before they finally retire it. So I'm not going to say this is a one marathon race shoe. It's definitely not. It's got me through 40Ks of running so far, and much faster than marathon pace as well. But I'm not going to say this is going to go forever, especially when there's a fair bit of exposed foam here on the bottom. I wouldn't be buying this one solely on its durability, but I wouldn't be holding off buying it because you think it's going to last for 1 or 2 runs. It's going to do better than that. I would say it's going to be about average amongst the racing shoes on the market right now. Coming around to the price point, this is where things get even better. $280 on Aliexpress here in Australia is fantastic. That's $100, $120 cheaper than all other relevant racing shoes, and for the most part, it's better than 95% of them. That is brilliant value. If you're chasing top line performance, you want to spend under 300. Yeah, you're sick of shelling out $400 for a shoe which is pretty much the same as last year. This is something to look into. And if you're willing to be a little bit more adventurous and go onto apps like Taobao, you can pick this up for 160 Australian dollars, which is just absurd. I picked that up through Taobao, was not really expecting anything, to be honest. I thought this would just be a Vaporfly equivalent. I actually had no idea it was going to be this light. And so pulling this out of the box, or pulling what felt like an empty bag off my doorstep, cracking that open to find an Evo Pro 1 competitor was probably one of the best days of my life. So yeah, $160, $280. Pick your poison. Do you want to go through Aliexpress, which is in English and is probably a little bit more convenient? Or do you want to do a bit of work, do some auto translating with your phone to work out how to get it on Taobao? Up to you. I'll try to put some links in the description just to help you with your search process. That brings us around to the comparisons. I've got 4 models here which I want to have a quick chat about. First is the Adios Pro 4 from Adidas. I think this has some similarities in terms of the kind of dense rubbery response that you get from Lightstrike Pro. This time though, with the Pro 4, I do think you get a little bit more squish before that rebound happens. So that's going to be a key difference here. This is definitely firmer on landing and on toe off, whereas this is a bit squishier, and then you get that kind of deep bottomless sensation of the foam punching back. Rocker is also a little bit more aggressive. I think it throws you off the front of the shoe a little bit more. Whereas I think with the firmer foam, you can kind of get a bit more of your toe off from the bounce of the foam compared to the rocker, which is not as present anyway. In terms of the fit and upper, you're going to get a nicer experience in the Adios Pro 4, which is fair. It's got more weight to it. The material is just a little bit softer, a little bit nicer on the foot. And then on the outsole, CPU rubber versus whatever this is, pretty much match. They both grip well in the wet. This is a little bit more silent, so that could be considered a win there. I'm not necessarily sure that people who love the Adios Pro 4 are guaranteed to like the PB Pro. I think if you enjoyed the Adios Pro 3 and liked some of the changes to the Adios Pro 4, I think maybe the PB Pro could be a kind of halfway point maybe. You get the firmer feel of the Pro 3 here with the propulsion of the Pro 4, somewhere in and around that zone. This feels very Adidas coded. And so yeah, I think if you like the firmer versions of some Adidas shoes, this could be one to look at. Second one is the Farstar Nitro Elite 3. I have done 2 runs in this one now, and I'm having a very hard time picking between these 2 shoes. This feels more directed in its rocker. I feel like it offloads my calves and loads up my quads, which gives me this kind of powerful feeling in my stride. Whereas this, I don't even really know what it's doing to me to make it feel so good, but it just turns over continuously, lock into a pace, I just forget about it. There is some similarities, I guess, in terms of that efficient feel that I get. I feel like I can just rely on both of these shoes to turn over. But I do think the Puma is a little bit more present in my stride. I can really notice how long I'm spending on the ground, pushing, I guess, against the ground with the plate, that kind of extended toe off. I do notice that a little bit more, whereas the PB Pro feels a bit more natural, I suppose. Weight-wise, between the two, quick check here. Oh, that's actually a fair bit more. 182 versus 163. 20 grams, I'm not persuaded that you can notice the difference. I think the bounce of the foam makes up for it. I would be very interested to see what difference that makes if I was to strap into an economy test. Very, very hard to pick between the two. Both have a fairly long fitting upper with a bit of a squeeze through the midfoot, although it is tighter in the Puma. And then on the outsole, Puma grip versus this stuff, again, pretty much balanced. They're both doing the job. $350 for the Farstar 3 here in Australia is great value, but again, $160, pretty hard to argue with the PB Pro. Right now, if I had to chuck on a shoe for a 5 and 10K, it's so hard to choose. I was about to say I would choose the Puma. I'm actually just still not sure. I think they're pretty much of similar levels of performance for myself. I'm going to be considering both of these up to the half marathon especially, and then when we get up to the marathon, that's where shoes like the Adios Pro 4 probably come back into the conversation, but I would still be happy to race that distance in these 2 shoes. Another one was the Metaspeed Edge Tokyo, which I've done 1 session in so far. Really enjoyed it, loved the forefoot sensation of the Flight Foam Leap. That will be one of the key differences between these 2, is that you do get this kind of 2-part story with the edge, with the firmer foam in the heel, softer up front, kind of really promotes that forefoot strike to get that big bounce out of the front of the shoe. Here with the Dowin PB Pro, although it does have a bit of an incentive in terms of getting up onto the kind of edge of that rocker, so that when you're compressing it and getting the rebound, it's kind of at the right time. I don't think it's as demanding as the edge. I felt like I needed to strike a certain spot in the edge, although it did feel good and it felt reasonably natural. It wasn't a comparison to the PB Pro, which felt good within a good range of strikes for me. So it just never really fell out of my stride. Whereas the edge, there was a few steps that I'd take where it didn't feel quite right. In terms of the weight difference, 10 grams, 174, 163, no real difference there. This is definitely a little bit more cushioned, a little bit more protective. I would probably say that I still prefer the PB Pro based on first impressions. It'll be interesting to see how that progresses with a few more Ks. And then my final comparison is to another Chinese brand, Dynafish Danian 1, another hyperlight racing shoe. 150 grams here, super, super light, softer foam, but still with some elements which keep things fairly comfortable, which I would say is making it probably the most similar Hyperlight racing shoe that I've used. When I've also tried out the 361 Degrees Miro Nude, which was more of a stripped down racing flat, and then the Chowdan Xinghong Racer, which was pretty much non-existent on foot. You could feel the road completely. It was fun for sure, but not really of the same full marathon capability style. I think the main difference here is the aggression. This is definitely a little bit more toned back. The paces this feels best at for me is threshold and above, so 325 to 345. Threshold to marathon pace, I think this works quite nicely. Softer foam, sink in, get that long smooth rocker. Pretty explosive toe off, to be fair, but I did find that if I pushed the pace too much, I started to feel the forefoot shank amongst the soft foam. Difference is that the PB Pro has a bit more of a gutsy foam, and with a complete carbon plate, it doesn't matter how much I get into the foam, it still feels pretty flat. I can get up into 5-10k pace, no worries at all, and I think the firmer foam allows for that. In terms of what race distances I would use these for, I would be pretty happy to use both of these for the half marathon distance, but I do think that the PB Pro is a little bit more aggressive, and then 5 and 10k would be dominated by the Pro. Marathon, things get interesting. This would be another situation where I've got heaps of shoes which are lining up for it. It would be a pretty complicated decision-making process, but both would be mentioned in the 7 or 8 different shoes that I would try out for the marathon distance. The fit in the Dino Fish is also worth mention. Very snug through the midfoot. So if that sounds like something which wouldn't work for you, I encourage you to watch my review. The PB Pro could be a solution to get your foot into a Hyperlight racing shoe for not much money at all. About 150 for this, 160, 2 awesome options if you're strapped for cash. So yeah, wrapping that up, the Dowin PB Pro is fantastic. This is one of the best finds that I have come across this year. So happy that I managed to get my hands on it. I hope you guys can try it out as well for $160 or maybe even less, depending on where you look. This is definitely a must try if you're chasing something fast. You want an aggressive racing shoe at that weight without the price point. It's just a lot of fun. Really enjoyed this one. You'll see this one popping up in considerations for any races that I'm doing in the future, maybe a 10k in about 10 weeks. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. More comparisons to come.